All right, Pickle. We're back from San Antonio in the THSEA Coaching School and Convention. And obviously, there's a lot that goes on at the THSEA Coaching School and Convention. For example, Kendall Miller of Frisco Emerson was elected the THSEA president-elect. They always do a weird thing. It's hard for people to wrap their head around. But, like, basically, they do the president-elect, and the president-elect is basically, like, waiting in the wings for an entire year, and then he gets gavelled in. So, for example, who became the president this time around?
Lee Wigington.
Lee Wigington and Allen became the president.
Which technically he would have been inducted when he was still at Midlothian Heritage, and then now he's at Allen.
But John King's watch ended at there, but he was elected like 2 years ago, which is weird. So his watch ended.
Which really is a great way to do it, because then they get basically 2 years of work out of the guy, if we're being honest.
I presume that John King just like threw his sport coat out the window on the way back to Gregg County.
And was like, back to ball.
Back to ball, back to what I want to do. But Lee Wigington is the new president, and Kendall Miller of Frisco Emerson is the new president-elect. I believe he is the first black coach to be the president-elect of the THSEA, which is pretty cool. Anyway, Kendall Miller, the new president-elect. So there's a lot of business that goes on like that, a lot of content that we get. Obviously, we're going to be playing interviews, and you can find them on TexasFootball.com. But one of the things that also happens is, as we all start to think about football season, there's a couple of people that we are really interested in talking to. One of them came by the booth. We wanted to get him on an interview set. It just didn't line up. But Bill Theodore of the Texas Association of Sports Officials. Texas Association of Sports Officials run through. They do a lot of seminars on what the rule changes are heading into the fall. There's a couple of noteworthy ones. One of them is that they is a rule against cut blocking in the tackle box, which is bad news for teams that run like the slot T. That's going to be pretty challenging for them, but that is a rule that, if you didn't know, the UIL goes through. They use the NCAA rules to run their football. They do not use what is the National Federation of High Schools, which is, if you go to Florida, if you go to Pennsylvania, if you go to a number of other places, cut blocking has been banned for a long time. At all level. I mean, you can't do it at the if you're cut blocking a safety, like on a downfield block. Anyway, within the tackle box, you can no longer cut block, which is going to be a challenge for a number of teams. Another thing is, do you remember last year when the Pitt quarterback, I forget his name, but the Pitt quarterback basically faked a slide and then was able to pick up like a touchdown on it?
Yeah, I do remember that.
That rule has been changed by the NCAA, and so that rule has now been changed by the UIL, in the sense that you cannot fake a quarterback slide. I don't know if I saw it in high school last year, but you can't do it. That one has been run out of the paint. You can't do that. So those were kind of the headliners as far as rule changes are concerned. But the other thing that happens that's particularly noteworthy is the UIL has a press conference.
Yep.
Now, if we have a question for the UIL, they're pretty responsive. They're available if you have questions. Like throughout the year, like if in 3 weeks I have a question about some sort of rule, I can email our friends at the UIL, and Dr. Jamie Harrison and the communications staff will get back to us and let us know. So it's not like they're unavailable, but it is kind of strange that for an organization as wide-ranging and as kind of omnipotent in a lot of ways as the UIL, they don't do press conferences. No. They do essentially one a year. They don't really do one at state football. They don't really do one here, there. You know, they're available for interviews, but they don't really do sit down, or rather standard press conferences. But they do one, and that is at THSEA Coaching School and Convention. And it was held Sunday morning. They had a press conference. Our own Matt Stepp and I believe Greg Powers went to it. Were there any other of our nerds there?
Yeah, a lot of them went.
A few of them. Okay.
Yeah, I know Ish was there, and I think Craven was there too.
Okay. And it's an opportunity to ask the muckety mucks there at the UIL, specifically Executive Director Dr. Charles Breidup, Deputy Executive Director Dr. Jamie Harrison, and Athletic Director Dr. Susan Elza, WTF Zone, some questions. The overall headline of the UIL press conference was not much. Not a whole lot was brought up. There have been times where they've dropped some bombshells. For example, that's where they, a few years ago, where they kind of said that they were giving the the one-time exemption for Bally Sports Southwest to do their become Texas Football Days. That has also been
Isn't that where the streaming news during COVID came out?
Streaming news came out during COVID, things like that. But this particular one, there wasn't really a huge headline. If you're talking about what did come out of there, there's a couple of things that are worth noting. One of them is that the streaming rule, the web streaming rule, has become official and permanent. That is not going anywhere. That is going to be something that you can live web stream games going forward on Friday nights. That was something that came out during the pandemic and that they've kept around, and that is now permanent. They announced that. I don't know if they've said that publicly, but that was something we assumed was going to be the case, but it is now permanent. You can now web stream games on Friday night. I think that's good. I also have a dog in the hunt because we own Texan Live, so I think that's good. But I also think that when you talk with coaches, they wanted that to happen anyway. They liked that kind of coverage, and they liked being able to have the game broadcast. And so I think it's good for the sport.
Everyone
I've said that
tends
before.
to be in favor of out-of-state grandma being able to watch their kids play.
Yeah, generally speaking. And I think that overall you've seen that there hasn't necessarily been that the concern about is this going to hurt the gate has been pretty unfounded. And so the live streaming rule is now permanent. That's one thing. Another thing that they came out with was that they did say that they had technically not announced, kind of weird, they hadn't announced where the state championships were going to be. The state championships for 2022 will be at AT&T Stadium in Arlington. Dr. Jamie Harrison and he admitted to at the press conference, he says, I do not have the contract in front of me. He goes, I know that it is in 2022 that it'll be at AT&T. He said, and I believe him, I don't know how long the contract runs offhand. I can look it up, but I don't know how long the contract runs. Here is that is the fact. Here, let's now move into the Greg Tepper opinion zone. In talking with folks around the UIL, they like it at AT&T Stadium. They're comfortable there. And while they want to continue for there to be opportunities for Houston and San Antonio, most notably, to bid on it, I know that it would take some pretty overwhelming bid from them for them to move it in the next couple of years.
Oh, right.
That's kind of how I feel.
Well, and
my vibe, my read of the tea leaves.
I was fixing to say, you want to talk about at least number facts. We've done the math on looking at all of the teams that have made it since it's been there. And legitimately, that's the most centralized location, at least for the years that it has been played there. So there are some number of facts of it doesn't seem like it because you look at a state map, but the teams that have been qualifying, it really has been one of the most centralized locations that it could have been in, possibly.
Right. I think that's right. So the 2022 state championship games will be at AT&T Stadium in Arlington. We suspected that. We now have confirmation of that. The other headline that came out that got some people talking was, I believe it was Stepp, because he's a fire starter. He asked the question about Class 7A. It's been rumored for a couple of years now. When is the UIL going to launch a Class 7A? And what is it going to look like? When does it look like? And so that question was fielded to Dr. Jamie Harrison, who is really their realignment wonk. He's the guy who does a lot of the nitty-gritty, and he gets into it. And I've had a lot of very fun, weird conversations with him about what realignment looks like and how to do it better. In any case, the response to that was that the UIL said they're going to look at a Class 7A in 2024 for the next realignment. They're going to look at it. Now, they followed that up pretty quickly by saying the math doesn't make sense right now. It doesn't make sense to launch a Class 7A right now. And it probably won't. We've got the whole quote up on TexasFootball.com if you want to go hear Dr. Harrison. We probably should have pulled it and played it on the show. That would be the thing that a good internet show does, but that's not us. But essentially, what he signaled was that Class 7A is unlikely in 2024. I think that he didn't rule it out, but he essentially said that the math is not there. We'll be looking at it's really a math problem. You have to go too far to make a 7A work currently. Now, the demographics and the populations are shifting in the state of Texas in a pretty significant way, but reading between the lines of what Dr. Harrison said, it seems unlikely that in 2024 we'll have Class 7A. 2026? Maybe. That'll be 4 years from now. You can do math. But it seems like right now they don't feel comfortable putting a 7A out there simply because there's just not enough schools of that size, and that it would be creating its own different kind of problems. Like, what do you do with programs that are way out there that have no other 7A teams around them? And by no other 7A teams around them, I mean within like 200 miles of them.
Right. And the thing that we keep pounding on with this is the fact that this doesn't like everyone thinks it just affects like Class 6A. Okay, well, clearly it's just going to affect, like, it doesn't. Class 3 and 4A would be the ones that would take the biggest hit here almost, and which is wild to think about, but it really is a trickle-down effect. And, the UIL being encompassing of everyone, it just doesn't make sense right now.
So essentially, here's a quote, and I'm picking this up from our friend Mike Foreman at the Victoria Advocate. Dr. Jamie Harrison of the UIL said, it's really a math problem. He explained that there's 500 schools in 5A and 6A and 190 in Class 4A. Quote, you're going to need about 600 schools to make that work. We know we have 500. Where's that other 100 going to come from? When you look at the bottom of the current 5A down to pick up another 100, you're going to have to go pretty deep into the enrollment. You get into that 1,100, 1,200, 1,300 range. There just aren't that many schools. He did admit, though, this is reading directly from Mike Foreman of the Victoria Advocate, Harrison admitted the state's growth makes adding Class 7A a good possibility for the future. Quote, Texas is such a fast-growing state. There are some school districts where it feels like they open a new high school every 7 minutes. As those continue to be added to the roster of UIL schools, we get closer and closer to that 7A rank. So that's where it's going. Right now, I think everybody's itching for it because I think everyone looks at kind of the discrepancy between the very top of 6A and the very bottom of 6A, which can be like 5,000 students. And they say, we've got to find a way to do that. But essentially, that's where they're at. They're waiting for more schools to come online. And when more schools come online, then the necessity of a 7A will become more and more apparent. But for now, it just doesn't seem like that's necessary or viable at the moment. In 2 years, I think Dr. Harrison is kind of saying out loud, doesn't seem like it's going to be viable then either. 2026? Maybe we're getting to that point. But I think as far as if you're looking for a timeline of when Class 7A is going to come online in Texas high school football, 2026 would probably be the earliest realistic, barring some sort of major demographic shift or something unforeseen.
It's going to take suburb areas around the DFW and around Houston to make this work. I feel like Frisco is the prime example of this in my opinion. It's like they keep opening new schools. There are thousands of kids going to those schools. Like, it's going to take those suburbs really blowing up to make this work as easily as possible.
So that's what you got to think about. It's a holistic approach there for the UIL. They've got it. For one, I agree with you. I think that it's like, wow, you've got schools with 5,000 kids playing kids with 2,200 kids. How does that make sense? I agree with you. There is a problem there, but at the same time, you can't create different problems for different schools and say this is better. You have to weigh everything. So that's the update from the UIL. Again, it was a relatively not very newsworthy press conference. Dr. Jamie Harrison came by our booth and I chatted with him. And he did say, he was like, it was kind of nice to just have a boring press conference that we weren't talking about COVID mitigation strategies, or are we going to limit the number of fans in the stands, stuff like that. I imagine for them it was a relief to just kind of get back to normal football and fielding Matt Sepp's questions. But in any case, that's the news from the THSEA Coaching School and Convention and the annual UIL press conference. You can go and hear Dr. Jamie Harrison's full response on the Class 7A if you go to TexasFootball.com. Hey, thanks for watching this clip here on YouTube. If you like this kind of stuff and you want more of it, make sure you subscribe to our YouTube channel. And remember, you can watch us live every weekday at noon at TexasFootball.com, Facebook, Twitch, or here on YouTube. And if you want more of the best coverage of football in the state of Texas, check out TexasFootball.com and become a Dave Campbell's Texas Football Insider at TexasFootball.com/subscribe.